So I just watched The Suicide Squad, and it was really good. Now, for those who don't know, The Suicide Squad is a standalone sequel / sort of reboot of the 2016 film Suicide Squad. I know it sounds the same, but see, that film is just Suicide Squad, while this one is The Suicide Squad. Totally different. But the titles aren't the only difference in these productions. I've made it no secret in the past that Suicide Squad is one of my least favorite films ever, and it's probably the worst superhero movie ever made. Ugly lighting, baffling music choices, uninteresting characters, an incoherent mess of a plot. With all these factors, The Suicide Squad was in a pretty good place given that the first film was so bad, there was nowhere to reasonably go but up. And much to my pleasant surprise, this film is not only an improvement, but was simply an entertaining film even without comparing it to the 2016 movie. One major improvement is that this film is stunning to look at. All the colors pop and are a treat to behold. All the costumes are really well designed, including the dumb-looking ones, which were clearly done so on purpose to show how useless most of these villains are. The CGI is very well implemented and rarely took me out of the experience, which says a lot for a DC film. Even their good ones like Shazam still have moments of bad-looking visual effects that take me out of it for a bit. All the CG characters like King Shark and Starro felt believable and didn't clash with the real environments that much. The only time I was sort of taken out of it was whenever there were a bunch of rats on screen, but it was still pretty well done given the magnitude, and it even services the scene by making them feel that much more unsettling. Another thing that this film has over the first is that it's actually funny, and I mean really damn funny.
We're all gonna die.
I hope so.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
A lot of that can be credited to the film's R rating. It allowed the writers and visual directors to get away with so much more than any other superhero film, with its only real rival being Deadpool. It's easy to tell that this film actually has creative freedom unlike the previous one, and it's even easier to tell that this one has James Gunn's fingerprints all over it. I'm still so thankful he avoided getting canceled way back when. Not only was it undeserved, Hollywood is in desperate need of more creative minds like him. There's a reason Suicide Squad went through so many re-edits. DC was taking note of how films like Guardians of the Galaxy and Deadpool were doing really well, except they didn't realize it takes more than loud flashy visuals and pop culture references to make a superhero film better. You have to actually have a creative mind behind it who's passionate about filmmaking, and given James Gunn originally directed both Guardians films, having him come back for a similar concept of a gang of misfits rallying together brings everything full circle. This means that previous things the 2016 film attempted, such as a non-linear story and using pop culture music, are well executed here since Gunn actually knows what the hell he's doing. The way both Suicide Squad films are told out of order can serve as textbook examples of the right and wrong way to pull something like that off. In the first film, the out-of-order element in no way felt purposeful and only served to drive home how much of a mess the movie's production was. But here, thanks to the plot itself being for the most part straightforward, anytime we'd cut to another period of time, it managed to subvert my expectations and keep me on my toes throughout. What really sold it to me, though, was the use of transitions. We don't just get big text saying 3 days earlier or whatever. James Gunn manages to utilize the environment in natural and over-the-top ways that look pretty damn cool. The fact that it was a consistent element helps sell that this film had a clear vision in mind when it came to style, whereas the 2016 film clearly added style haphazardly at the last minute. Another last-minute addition, and probably the most infamous issue in the first film, was the use of licensed music. The first 3 minutes of the film had a new licensed song every minute, and that was merely an omen of how terrible the soundtrack would be. None of the songs service the scenes in any way, and when you use so many of them, it feels more like an office party playlist than a professional film soundtrack. But because this is James Gunn, the Suicide Squad didn't have a single out-of-place licensed song. When your film starts with Johnny Cash, you know you're in for a treat. The scenes actually felt like they were written with their respective songs in mind, and because they were much less frequent, it made the licensed songs that did appear much more special. Now I'd like to get more into the characters and the story, which requires spoilers for me to go more in depth. So if you haven't seen the film yet and any of what I said before sounds at all interesting to you, I implore you to watch the film first and then come back here. Going into the film blind and watching it with friends did wonders in boosting my enjoyment of it. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1...
Bird.
Now it. Stay off the comp.
I mentioned before how funny this film is, and how it's thanks to the R rating, but this film wouldn't have been nearly as entertaining without its strong ensemble cast. The first film was nothing short of embarrassing when it came to how it handled having multiple main characters. Need I remind you of the steak dinner scene? Luckily, I can't think of a single character I outright disliked this time. The film's opening was the best way to start a movie like this. It perfectly drives home the concept of a Suicide Squad and what their whole point is by making us think we're following the main team, only to have them be decoys for the actually effective members. It helps too that there were characters in the decoy team from the first film, making the twist all all the more surprising. When Boomer bit the dust, I was firmly on the edge of my seat for the remainder of the runtime, knowing that literally anyone could die. Except for Harley. The opening also helped set the tone right from the get-go. It managed to take the chaos of the parachute scene from Deadpool 2 and make things even more sadistically brutal and hilarious. My friends and I had to rewatch it multiple times just for good measure. When it comes to characters that actually matter, I was invested in pretty much everyone on screen. Every character returning from the previous film is infinitely better portrayed this time, with the exception of Boomer simply for having less screen time. Rick Flag may still be the moral compass of the group, but he has way more personality and acts as a great straight man. Same goes for Amanda Waller. While she's not that different from the last time, this movie was more tailor-made for a role as a stoic hardass completely unfazed by the ridiculous shit in her vicinity. And for the first time in these films, I finally understand the hype around Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. She just had tons more to work with this time, and felt like a much more accurate portrayal of Harley in the comics and cartoon. Even if most of her scenes don't have that much bearing on the plot, I didn't care too much because I was simply entertained by the hijinks she'd get into. One of the more annoying aspects of her character from last time was why she inexplicably cared so much about El Diablo killing kids, despite the fact that she's, you know, Harley Quinn. But I get it more this time since she had just broken up with the Joker and would reasonably have a bit more moral fiber, even if she's still a little clueless when it comes to empathy. This movie also pulled off the Herculean task of selling me on Harley as a formidable threat. I was always questioning why some chick with a hammer was on this team of metahumans and skilled marksmen. Turns out all the last film had to do to solve this problem was give us one of the most entertaining prison escapes in movie history. Seriously, I could watch this shit on loop. It's oozing with James Gunn personality and the kind of trippy visuals perfectly fitting for a character as deranged as Harley. There's also plenty of newcomers, and while a majority of them are just here to die, we still get plenty of standouts. Polka Dot Man is how you make awkward humor work, and if I was forced to see everyone as the same Karen over and over again, I'd probably be messed up too. King Shark may be this film's Groot essentially, but he does enough of his own stuff to be more than just a copy-paste of the classic scary monster is a lovable oaf trope, and I'd 100% love to be his new dumb friend. Bloodsport is basically Deadshot except, surprise surprise, a better written version. This wasn't by accident either, since Idris Elba was apparently supposed to replace Will Smith initially, but they decided to use a different comic character instead, which was a good decision. Not only is his design really cool, it also made it more questionable if he'd die or not. Plus, Idris is simply much better at portraying these kinds of characters than the Fresh Prince. Bloodsport has some great scenes with his daughter and the other team members, but he shines the most when playing off of Peacemaker. This guy is basically Captain America, but a douche, and he steals every scene he's in. The dick measuring contest these two have while rescuing Flag is probably the funniest scene in the movie.
No one likes to show off.
Unless what they're showing off is dope as fuck.
Fuck. That's true.
I also just find lawful evil characters really fascinating because no matter how terrible their actions are, they always find some way to justify it in a way that you can at least understand. And finally, there's Ratcatcher 2, by far the sleeper hit for me in terms of new characters, no pun intended. She's not only a necessary beacon of sympathy for the group, but her backstory of why she trusts rats and everyone around her is super heartbreaking, and it makes her the most endearing member of the cast. And it also gives us a Taika cameo, so that's always based. But you know what? Everyone is endearing because they're actually given moments to be characters. It's not just constant flashbacks, exposition, montages, and fight scenes. We get moments of cooldown where everyone bonds and gets on each other's nerves. They actually feel like a really messed up family, and it made me want to see as many of them survive as possible. It's such a nice change of pace to go into a superhero movie and not know who might make it out alive. And the fact that I love these characters makes all the action scenes all the more intense. Nobody is invincible. Again, except for Harley, but that's a given, and in a way part of the character's appeal. Even some of the side characters like Waller's subordinates have fun moments. I like how they literally have a Deadpool for the mission, and the climax of them rebelling is super satisfying. This movie isn't infallible though. Like I mentioned with Harley's segment, every now and then we'll get moments or even entire scenes that probably should have been cut. The 2+ hour long length didn't feel justified, and probably could have been shortened to 1 hour and 55 minutes realistically. I'm also iffy on having so many antagonists in any superhero film, though I really like how Starro was handled. Foreshadowed throughout the beginning, then we get some found footage showing what he's capable of, then we get a freaky as fuck scene in the underground lab that wouldn't feel out of place in a horror film. Or other genres, now that I think about it. And then when he finally emerges from underground and we get those awesome versus visuals, I was actually hyped for my big dumb CGI kerfuffle. Take notes, Doomsday. Also whatever the fuck that climax in Suicide Squad was. Also, James Gunn somehow found a way to make Starro sympathetic at the last second, and I am both pleased and pissed at him for doing this. Hopefully this movie will open more studios' eyes as to why it's so important to give up creative freedom to the real artists. And yes, that goes for Rooster Teeth 2, you dickheads. I'm not saying all superhero movies need to be rated R, but if more of them can embrace the weird and give us something cool like this film did, then I'm all for it. If there's one thing DC has over Marvel, it's that even though they're not nearly as consistent, when they have their hits, they hit hard. Even the Snyder Cut shows some step in the right direction of creative freedom. As for whether or not everyone deserves the same creative freedom is up to the eye of the beholder. In any case, The Suicide Squad is a solid movie that improves upon the first in nearly every way. The soundtrack is a bop and gets appropriately used, the visuals are grade A eye candy, I didn't find a single character to be a dud, the fight scenes were intense and brutal, the cinematography can give us some really creative shots, and the whole thing is dripping with that classic James Gunn style. If you have HBO Max, or are brave enough to go to the theaters, then I think you'll have a really great time with this one, regardless of whether or not you've seen the first. And I'm giving this film an 8 out of 10. It's closer to a 9 than a 7. Bye!